There is a specific kind of silence that appears when certain plans are mentioned, while others respond with logistics and anticipation. Some people respond inwardly, weighing their energy before their words. That pause is often interpreted as indifference or avoidance, an easy label applied from a distance. Yet the silence usually protects something more complex than it appears, shaped by long patterns of emotional processing. If this feels close to your own experience, you can stay here for a moment and let the video unfold at its own pace. Walking away not from love, but toward what feels real. The common story says that not showing up means not caring enough, as if presence were the only proof of love. But for some people, stepping away is not an act of rejection. It is an act of alignment. It is the quiet recognition that being there would require shrinking, performing, or holding a version of themselves that no longer fits. They might sit alone on an ordinary evening, noticing how their breath finally deepens once the obligation is gone, like loosening a collar that has been tight for years. This choice is not cold or dramatic. It is often gentle, almost apologetic, and within it lives a subtle truth. Sometimes love is still there, but being real matters more than being seen. The quiet moments that slowly change everything. These decisions rarely happen all at once. They are shaped in small, forgettable moments that slowly accumulate weight. A conversation that feels rehearsed. A laugh that arrives half a second too late. Sitting at a table while feeling strangely absent from it. Over time, these moments begin to teach the nervous system what to expect. The body starts to recognize tension before the mind does, like a room that feels too loud even when no one is shouting. One night, alone after a gathering, there is a sense of exhaustion that doesn't match the length of the evening. That fatigue becomes information, not dramatic, not angry, just quietly instructive. And without announcing it, something inside begins to shift when being yourself starts to feel unsafe. For many, the issue is not the gathering itself, but the version of the self that must be brought into that space. There is a subtle calculation that happens, often unconsciously, about what can be said, what should be softened, what parts need to stay hidden. Over time, authenticity begins to feel risky rather than grounding. They might notice how their shoulders tense when familiar voices fill the room, how their thoughts become guarded, careful. It is not fear in the obvious sense, but a learned caution. Like walking on a floor you know can creak. Choosing distance becomes a way to protect something fragile and still forming. Not because others are cruel, but because the environment no longer feels safe enough to be whole. Growing up, learning how to disappear to belong. Some people learn early that belonging requires disappearance, that being too visible brings tension, conflict, or disappointment. So they adapt by becoming agreeable, quiet, easy to accommodate. Family spaces often reinforce this pattern, even unintentionally. Years later, the habit remains. They show up physically, but internally they fade, or they stop showing up altogether. There is a memory of sitting in a childhood room, listening more than speaking, learning that harmony depended on self-erasure. That lesson doesn't vanish with age. Avoiding gatherings becomes less about avoidance and more about refusing to disappear again. It is a slow reclaiming of presence, even if that presence now happens elsewhere, in silence or in chosen solitude. The day piece begins to matter more than showing up. At some point, there is a shift that feels almost mundane. Peace becomes noticeable. The absence of tension stands out more than the presence of people. They might spend a holiday morning doing something simple, like making coffee or watching light move across the room, and realize they are not bracing themselves for anything. That calm feels unfamiliar, then precious. The choice not to attend is no longer fueled by conflict, but by clarity. It is not about proving a point or drawing a line. It is about honoring the body's preference for steadiness. This doesn't erase love or history. It simply rearranges priorities. And in that rearrangement, showing up to oneself quietly takes precedence. Carrying guilt while choosing yourself. Even when the choice feels right, it rarely feels clean. Guilt lingers, soft but persistent. There is an awareness of expectations unmet, of stories others might tell about absence. They might imagine empty chairs, unanswered questions, or disappointed looks that may or may not exist. This guilt does not mean the decision is wrong. It means the person still cares. Caring and choosing oneself often coexist uncomfortably. The emotional load is carried silently, without needing to be justified. Over time, the guilt changes shape. It becomes lighter, less sharp, not because the bond disappears, but because self-betrayal is no longer an option. And that internal permission slowly reshapes the weight of the choice. Finding home beyond blood and obligation. Eventually, many begin to redefine what home means. It becomes less about shared history and more about felt safety. Home shows up in conversations where no translation is needed, in spaces where silence is allowed, in relationships that do not demand a smaller self. This doesn't replace family. It exists alongside it, or sometimes apart from it. They might notice how their body relaxes around certain people, how time passes differently there. These connections are not louder or more impressive. They are simply steady, and in finding them, something settles. The absence from gatherings is no longer the main story. What matters more is the quiet sense of belonging that no longer requires explanation. Stepping away does not always signal loss. Sometimes it marks a careful preservation of self. What remains is not a conclusion, but a quieter awareness of how differently people measure closeness. If any of this felt close, it may be because you have learned how calm can emerge when expectation fades. These patterns tend to unfold slowly, unnoticed, becoming part of daily life before they are understood. For some, not attending family gatherings is only one expression of a larger boundary forming. There is another space to consider, where distance widens completely, and people cut everyone off as a final form of self-regulation. That space doesn't demand an answer now. It simply stays open,